Okay, I think we're going to be ready to give it a start then. And I'll call the meeting to order. State Government, Finance, Policy, and Elections Committee, today being Wednesday, January 27th, 2021. Welcome everybody to a very important hearing today on a very important bill. And being in the legislature, there are many times when bills are heard several times. This is nothing new. And each time we do have a bill hearing, we give it the attention it deserves. And oftentimes that is important to just keep that in mind. It's not unusual to do that. So with that, we're going to, I think most of you as members for your other committees are familiar with the voting process and things we need to do. And I'll work to give you a heads up, especially if it is a voice vote, to give you time to unmute so that you can. And to remind testifiers, if you have a time limit, it'd be important for you to keep track of your time. When we do have testifiers other than the chief author, then we will call time, and be important for you to keep an eye on that too. It always seems to go a little bit faster than you expect. And so I think all the preparation work, I think we're pretty well there. So welcome, Senator Newman. Glad to have you here today. And as a previous member of this committee, it's good to see you again, and appreciate your ongoing involvement in the election issues. And so, Senator Newman, I will move Senate File 173 to put it properly in order before this committee. Senator Newman, when you're ready, you can go ahead, and if you have any other details to take care of, you just let me know. I'll be able to make motions for you. But with that, you can go ahead and present, Senator Newman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I start, I see one senator I have not seen for a while, Senator Clausen. I want to say good morning to him. I don't think I've seen you, Senator Clausen, since last year.
I think you're right, Senator. I think as we departed the elevator, we said goodbye to one another. I think that was the last time.
I think that's right. It's nice to see you. And there is one senator I have never met. I'm going to take a shot at your name, Senator Fatah. I just want to introduce myself to you. We have not yet had the pleasure, and that is all the fault of Zoom. So it is nice to see you.
Nice to meet you as well, Senator Newman. Thank you.
And Senator Fateh, that is how you prefer your name to be pronounced correctly?
Both work, but Senator Fateh, but Fatah is the Somali way of saying it, so both work.
Okay.
No, I just got lucky.
All right.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, the first order of business as far as Senate File 173 is concerned is I do have an author's amendment. It's the A2 amendment, which if I could, I would have Ms. Stengel walk through that amendment at this time.
Okay, Ms. Stengel, if you go ahead and walk through the amendment. Ms.
Thank
Stengel.
you, Madam Chair and members. The amendment, I believe, was posted sometime shortly before the committee, so it should be available to all members. If it's not, let me know and I can email that out. So walking briefly through this, and some of it will make a little more sense when we do a walkthrough of the full bill later, but I can answer any questions now if we have them, or we can do it in more detail with the bill walkthrough. So the first couple of lines, line 2 and 3, make a couple of language changes to refer to an unexpired driver's license and an unexpired tribal ID. The next almost page of changes, line 1.4 through 2.4, make a series of changes to documents that people can use to prove residency along with a photo ID when they register on election day. And the reason for these changes is this is based on Minnesota Statute 1710605, which is the documents you can use to prove residency for a driver's license. During the last session, there were several changes to these documents to sort of streamline and add some additional documents. Senator Newman wanted to keep those two consistent. So with the changes here, the two provisions in statute are now similar. The next changes are on line 2.5 to 2.12, and this makes some changes to what happens when a person registers on election day. So under the bill as it's introduced, a person must show a photo ID to register to vote on election day. The amendment in lines 2.5 to 2.12 says that if you don't have the proper identity to prove identity and residence when you register to vote, you can still be allowed to register to vote, but you have to cast a provisional ballot. And the voter registration applications for the people without proper ID on election day are kept separate from other applications and processed immediately to verify whether the person is eligible to register or not. Line 2.13 deletes some redundant language. Line 2.14 to 2.17 corrects a cross-reference. Lines 2.18 to 3.1 amend the voter's Bill of Rights to specify that if you can't provide the required proof of identity and residence, you have the right to register to vote and to cast a provisional ballot. And then 3.2 to the end of the amendment makes some changes to the provisional ballot process when a person has to appear to prove their residency and identity after the election. And basically what happens here is a person can show up to prove their identity and residence. And as part of that process, they have to be registered in order for the ballot to be accepted. There's could be sort of a cross timing issue here where the person could show up to prove identity and residence before their voter registration application is processed. In that case, that ballot is set aside until the registration is completed, and if the registration is approved and all the other requirements are met, then the ballot is accepted. And that, Madam Chair, is the A2 amendment.
Okay, thank you very much, members. With this is an author's amendment, first time being heard in a committee. And so I will move the A2 amendment to Senate File 173. And members are going to have a voice vote if you want to take yourself off mute. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion prevails and is adopted. The A2 amendment. So Senator Newman, your bill is in the order I believe you would like it to be, and you may go ahead and present your bill. Thank you, Senator Newman.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, members of the committee. Senate File 173 as amended is an issue or involves an issue that I've been involved with now ever since I got into the Senate. And in 2012, I was the chief author of the voter ID bill that was a constitutional amendment bill that was ultimately placed on the ballot in 2012. That amendment was defeated by the voters. And in 2020, I decided maybe it was time to revisit the issue of voter ID. And so I brought an almost identical version of Senate File 173 as amended forward in 2020. Unfortunately, the voter ID bill, like much of our legislation in 2020, was interrupted by the COVID pandemic. And so we did not move forward with the bill last year. I've simply had it redrafted in 2021 as Senate File 173. And I am bringing it forward at this time for your consideration. I want to outline or list 4 reasons why I'm bringing the bill forward once again. And the first reason is that in the year 2021, we have got new members of the legislature who were not present in 2012. And we also have a new governor. I'd also indicate that in 2012, there were 2 constitutional amendments that were on the ballot. One was the voter ID amendment, and the other one was a marriage amendment, which in 2012 was really quite controversial. So there's 2 questions that occur to me with respect to the 2012 constitutional amendments. The first was, did the marriage amendment have a negative effect on the voter ID amendment, having a negative effect in dragging it down, and as a result, it was defeated? And the other question is, did the voters reject putting voter ID into the Constitution as opposed to having it placed in statute? There's no way to answer either one of those questions, but I do think that they are legitimate questions for consideration in coming forward with a voter ID bill in 2021. The third reason why I'm bringing the bill forward at this time is the genesis of the voter ID bill really comes out of the state of Indiana and an ensuing U.S. Supreme Court case that I'm going to be discussing with you in detail in a few minutes. But that United States Supreme Court case and the Indiana statute that it dealt with is now well over a decade old. And since then, there have been a total of 35 states that have enacted some form of a voter ID bill. We now have completed studies, we've got data, we've got court cases that we did not have in 2012 that address some of the concerns raised in voter ID. The fourth reason that I'm bringing the bill forward at this time is that I think that irrespective of political affiliation or political parties, we all have the same concerns when it comes to voting. And that is, number one, to protect the integrity of our election system. I think that's important to all of us. And the other thing that we think about is the potential disenfranchisement of voters because of the inability to comply with voting laws, or sort of the opposite side of that card, those citizens who are disenfranchised because their legal vote was nullified by an illegally cast and counted vote. I suspect I wouldn't get a whole lot of disagreement on this, but I believe that of all of the constitutional rights that we have, voting rights are probably arguably the most important. If we lose the right to vote and have our votes accurately counted, subsequently, if we were to lose our other constitutional rights, we'd never have a way to get our rights back without the right to vote. And so I really believe that discussing the issue of voting rights, the constitutionality of it, are really very important. And I simply want to have a discussion among us regarding this, what I would characterize as a modern election tool. Now, Madam Chair, I'd like to discuss and put into historical context, if I can, the underlying Supreme Court case that governs voter ID law in the United States, and the Indiana law that was the subject of that case. And the Indiana statute was drafted as a voter ID bill in 2005. Following the adoption of that law, a number of cases, court cases, were initiated. Ultimately, it wound its way up to the United States Supreme Court. And in the U.S. Supreme Court, that is the case of Crawford versus Marion County. The justice in 2008 that wrote the opinion was Justice Kennedy, who I think is kind of interesting in that he is normally at that time, he was considered the swing vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. And he is the one that wrote the opinion upholding the Indiana voter ID statute. And in writing for the court in the Crawford case, the court found that going back to the year 2000, voter confidence in this country's elections had decreased. And in ensuing years, there continued to be voter dissatisfaction with our election integrity, such that by Justice Kennedy wrote, 2004, only 48% of Americans were confident their votes were being accurately counted. The Indiana legislature took note of this voter dissatisfaction within this country, and they passed Indiana's version of the voter ID bill in 2005. Court challenges followed, ending with the United States Supreme Court of Crawford versus Marion County, which was issued in 2008. I think understanding the basic legal precepts of Crawford are important for all of us in order to address any potential voter ID bill, because the Crawford case is the case in the United States that laid down the legal holdings on which voter ID bills have to be considered. I'll discuss with you now the four legal findings of the legal precepts that Crawford laid down. The first precept, the first holding, is that the burden imposed by state law on voters must be justified by legitimate state interests. That's really an important finding, in that it isn't necessarily just the voters. The states have a legitimate interest in protecting the integrity of our voting systems. The Crawford case then went on to establish four legitimate state interests justifying the additional burden cast on voters in any voter ID bill. Those four burdens are: number one, deterring and detecting voter fraud. That's the first state interest that the Crawford case found. And I would note that this state interest is separate and distinct from the second state interest, which is to prevent voter fraud. And I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this, that deterring and detecting voter fraud is a separate and distinct state interest from preventing voter fraud. And I think it's kind of interesting that this item of voter fraud is the item that most people latch onto who oppose voter ID bills as the reason why voter ID should not be adopted. However, regarding voter fraud, Justice Kennedy wrote that voter fraud has been documented throughout our nation's history, that in-person fraud is not likely common, but it is difficult to detect, and that voter fraud is real and its effects could determine the outcome of a close election. Now here, let me digress. In Minnesota, we have had lots of close elections. What comes to mind immediately for me is mayoral elections. I can remember a number of mayoral elections that were determined by a flip of the coin. And they literally tied. And that's how the candidates decided to choose a winner, a flip of the coin. In legislative elections over the years, there have been a number of very close elections where the two candidates were separated by hundreds of votes out of thousands that were cast. Let me give you just one glaring example. Representative Mary Franzen represents a district northwest of the Twin Cities. And a few years ago, she won her election by one vote, one single vote. So let's extrapolate that for a second into the Minnesota Senate, only because that's where we are entertaining this bill. In the last two general elections, the majority versus minority in the Minnesota State Senate has been separated by one member. In 2016, 2017, or 2020, I'm sorry, the outcome of the elections was a margin of 34 to 33. Now think about the difference if in a very, very close election, one political party gains an advantage over the other. The political landscape in Minnesota would be drastically different than what it is right now. And I would urge you to remember that in the last two general elections, the Republicans came out on top. We wound up with 34. But that isn't necessarily true all of the time. That's going to cut both ways. And I just wanted to illustrate for you as best I could the importance of Justice Kennedy's finding that voter fraud in very close elections can have an outcome in the ultimate election. The third of the state's interest established by Crawford was the need to improve and modernize election procedures. One possible example of modernizing election procedures would be, for instance, the use of a driver's license receipt to prove identity. That's available in the 21st century, but it wasn't available to us in the 20th century, and that's because digital photography and the ease of transmitting photography is so much easier now. And that's just one simple example that I came up with, but it's important that the Crawford case recognized that modernization of our election process is important, and it is a legitimate state interest. And photo ID is but one of those modernizations. Finally, in terms of the state's interest, the fourth one established by Crawford was to safeguard voter confidence. And here's what the Crawford court wrote, quote, "Public confidence in the integrity of the electoral process has an independent significance. It has an independent significance because it encourages citizen participation in the democratic process." This is the court finding, frankly, that I think is often missed in the discussion regarding voter ID bills. Instead of concentrating on almost exclusively on the issue of voter fraud, the Supreme Court has established confidence in our system as an equally important consideration in justifying the burden imposed on voters by requiring a voter ID. The four standards that I have just outlined for you are the standards that are taken into consideration in justifying the burden imposed on or imposed by a state in a voter ID law on voters. And it's the first of the legal bases established by Crawford for a constitutional voter ID bill. The next, or the second, I should say, legal determination by Crawford is whether or not federal law authorizes a voter ID bill. And in fact, Crawford found that it did. And they said that federal law authorizes states to use photo ID to determine a person's eligibility to vote. On this question, the court wrote that election officials need to make sure that the person arriving at the polling place is the same person on the registration list. The third holding by the Crawford court, in which the court found that photo ID laws do in fact pose a burden on voters. But by providing for a provisional ballot and a free voter ID card for those who cannot or do not have a photo ID, the court found, quote, "It is not a substantial burden on the right to vote." The court went on to discuss the fact that with provisional ballots, no one is disenfranchised, while at the same time, the election officials can be assured that the person voting is the person on the registration list. Finally, the court ruled that there is a somewhat heavier burden placed on some voters to obtain the documents necessary to get a photo ID. And here Justice Kennedy specifically outlined the class of folks that he was talking about, where he specifically named the elderly, those born out of state, or those who have an economic or personal limitations. And Kennedy went on to write that this burden, this is the burden now on the folks who may be at somewhat of a disadvantage. This burden is mitigated by provisional ballots. And if a citizen is unable to obtain documents necessary to obtain a voter ID, the voter is allowed to execute an affidavit at the clerk's office, allowing the vote to be counted. And again, I think it's important to note that the court specifically determined that imposing this burden on a specific class of persons does not render a voter ID law unconstitutional, especially in view of the fact that as a last resort, if that individual cannot come up with the necessary documents to obtain an ID, a voter ID, they can they can sign an affidavit, I should say, and their vote, their ballot is then counted. Since Crawford was decided in 2008, there have been numerous court challenges on a wide variety of legal theories, with some having limited success. However, the cases that have come forward by individual states have really hinged on the specific voter ID bill passed in any given state. So for instance, in Missouri, the Missouri voter ID law was struck down by the Missouri Supreme Court in 2020. But it wasn't struck down because of voter rights violations. It was struck down because, as the court described, it was a controversy over a poorly drafted law requiring voters to sign a contradictory, misleading affidavit. And in the court's words, that is not a good means to achieve a voter ID's purposes and goals. So again, it was an individual state, the way that bill was written, which caused the bill to ultimately fail in the Supreme Court. As of today, I am not aware of any United States Supreme Court decision that has either changed or diluted the legal holdings determined in Crawford. In drafting Senate File 173, I have followed the legal holdings as set out by the Supreme Court in Crawford. I have really tried to follow exactly what Crawford said and what it laid out. However, I do want to bring to your attention that Crawford addressed only in-person voting. And while in-person voting is incorporated in this bill, Senate File 173, in accordance with the Crawford findings, I have also used those legal findings to extrapolate them into the Minnesota election laws, which allow for absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. As I believe that the same rules for in-person balloting should apply to absentee balloting and mail-in balloting as it relates to the integrity of our election system. So members and Madam Chair, the ultimate goal of this bill is number one, to protect the state's interests as identified in the Crawford case. Number two, minimize the burden on that group of voters who are required to obtain a voter ID card. Remember that a government issued photo ID card, for instance, like your driver's license or a military ID, you already qualify. So here we're talking about just those folks who don't have an identification card that would qualify to allow them to vote. And so they would be required to obtain a separate card called a voter ID card. Third, the purpose of this, or the goal of this bill, is to provide a method for that group of voters who are unable to obtain the necessary documents for a voter ID card so that they will not be disenfranchised. And that, of course, is the right to sign the affidavit saying they have tried and they have not been able to get that card. And then finally, it's to protect the integrity of the Minnesota election process so that those citizens who have properly voted will not be disenfranchised by votes illegally cast and counted. Madam Chair, this completes, my explanation of the history of the Crawford case, which I think is very important, as it is in fact the genesis of Senate File 173, in which the legal guidelines have been followed in order to obtain this ultimate goal that I have mentioned. Madam Chair, as of when we started our meeting, I can tell you we have requested a fiscal note. It has not yet been received. And I will tell you that I believe this bill will go from here to transportation. And I think that by the time we get the bill in transportation, and you sit on that committee, of course, Madam Chair, based on the fiscal note, if you want this bill back in state government, I will agree to send it back to state government. That is a decision that you will have to make after we hear it in transportation. I do think we'll have a fiscal note by that time, but for right now, we're going to have to leave the appropriation blank because I don't have it available. With that, Madam Chair, perhaps we could have Ms. Stengel walk us through the bill for the committee.
Thank you very much, Senator Newman. That was an excellent testimony. I think it's always really, really good for us to hear the Crawford decision and the quotes from the judges and others as well that I think lay the foundation for what we are doing on Senate File 173. With that, Ms. Stengel, I'll go ahead and have you cover those things that are important for us today, as Senator Newman has asked you to do. Ms. Stengel?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I will go through at a high level Article 1, and then I will not go through Article 2 because Article 2 is all conforming changes where it's essentially inserting references to a voter ID card in a variety of places. Happy to answer questions or provide more detail after my walkthrough, if that's helpful. Article 1, Section 1 on page 1 makes it clear that people that are participants in the Safe at Home program can continue to vote through that program, even with the changes that are made later in the bill. On page 2, Section 2, this is an insert into the Data Practices Act referencing how that data will be handled, and that's classified in a subsequent section. On page 2, Section 3, this talks about vital records. So a person can go get a vital record, such as a birth certificate from the state or the local issuance office for free. Section 4 is a variety of appropriations and transfers that pay for the free vital records. Moving to page 5, there are a series of sections here relating to driver's licenses and other things. So this bill requires the new voter ID card to be issued by a driver's license agent. Those are the same people that issue driver's licenses and state ID cards. So section 5 on the bottom of page 3 specifies that no fee can be charged for a voter ID card. Section 6 on page 4 also specifies that there can be no fee charged for a voter ID card and specifies that the local driver's license agent cannot collect any fee or surcharge that they usually would do when they issue a driver's license or ID card. Section 7 is the application for a voter ID card and specifies the information that is required, including identifying information and information to prove that you're eligible to vote. Section 8 is another cross-reference type situation where it again is specified that no fee can be charged. At the end of that section on page 7, there's a provision that requires the Commissioner of Public Safety to pay the driver's license agent $8 for each application processed for a voter ID card. That's the amount that they would usually get for a driver's license or something that they could charge a fee for. Section 9 at the bottom of page 7 talks about the ID card itself, how it's issued, what it must look like, and those sorts of things. Section 10, starting on page 8, the change is actually on page 9, and this has to do with when the ID card expires. Usually it's 4 years for people under 65, for over 65 it's 8 years, and for people or their spouse serving in the military, it's a longer period of time based on how long they are deployed. Section 11 requires a person to get a duplicate voter ID card if they move or change their address. Section 12 allows the Commissioner of Public Safety to cancel a voter ID card if the person wasn't entitled to it in the first place, and there's a process and notification for doing that. Section 13 on the bottom of page 10 is a new section of law that sets forth the different ways that you can prove your identity and residence. And these documents are used for a variety of situations, including election day registration, absentee voting, the photo ID requirement when you show up to vote in a polling place, and for determining whether to count a provisional ballot. And you can see that there are several pages of different ways that you can prove identity and residence, and all of them require a photo on an ID of some sort. In some cases, if you have a photo ID, such as a passport that doesn't have your address, then you show a secondary document like a utility bill or something like that that has your name and current address. And those three pieces together will prove your identity and residence. That section takes us to page 14. This is the voter identification card account. So this is where money is put into for a variety of disbursements and repayments to driver's license agents, to the Department of Public Safety and others for paying for the free voter ID card and implementing that. Another requirement here is that the Commissioner of Public Safety is required to reimburse individuals for fees that they are charged to secure an official document from a federal, state, or local government. So the bill sets up the ability to get these documents for free in the state of Minnesota. But for example, if you were born in another state and had to get a birth certificate from that state and they charged you, that person could seek reimbursement for that fee to get that birth certificate. And then there's a report required about the spending out of that account. Section 15 on page 15 is the election day registration. Here, the process is amended, requiring a person to show a proof of identity and residence when they register to vote on election day. And much of the current process for showing documents, non-photo ID documents or vouching is eliminated. And the A2 amendment that was adopted, there's a change here. This is the part that was added about individuals that can't prove their identity and residence on election day can still register and cast a provisional ballot. The next section starts at the top of page 17. This is section 16. This requires addresses in the polling place roster to be a person's address of residence unless that person is a judge or law enforcement or correction officer or is a participant in the Safe at Home program. Section 17 starts a series of sections having to do with absentee voting. Section 17 at the bottom of page 17 allows a person to use a voter identification card number on an absentee ballot application. And then at the bottom of page 18, the county auditor or municipal clerk that is verifying the absentee ballot applications must verify that the driver's license, state ID card, voter ID card, or social security number is valid and is assigned to that applicant before approving the registration or before approving the application. Section 18 makes some conforming changes to reference proving identity and residence, and then talking about an affidavit that we'll talk about in a moment. Section 19 makes some, you'll see some changes throughout some of these sections, changing return to signature envelope and things like that. Those are technical changes to sort of update the language to the actual practice and aren't necessarily tied to the voter ID, but it is some cleanup. You'll see references to voter ID cards in here, but the changes you'll see at the top of page 20 are the certificate for the witness includes some new things. One, that the absentee voter has to show the witness the same kind of proof of identity and residence that they would show to an election judge on election day. The witness then has to indicate what kind of documents were shown to that person. And the witness must be registered to vote in Minnesota, a notary republic, or somebody else authorized to administer an oath. when the individual is marking and returning the ballot, again, this is the provision that talks about the voter. The previous section talked about the witness. So this is, here requires the voter to present that proof of identity and residence. If the voter does not have the proof of identity and residence, but they attempted to procure that and were unable to, they may execute a sworn affidavit stating that they don't have the proper identification, that they tried to get it, the reason that they didn't get it, and a few other related items. Section 21, starting on page 21, requires the absentee ballot board to make sure that the portion of the certificate completed by the witness is completed and the documents that they reviewed were listed on that. Section 22, starting on page 23, takes us away from absentee ballots, and this is the sort of election, more general election law. Sections 22 and sections 23 have to do with mail elections and include similar changes, specifying that the elections must be conducted pursuant to state law and state rules, and requiring mail voters to show proof of identity and residence in the same manner an absentee voter would be. And just a quick note, mail balloting is similar to absentee balloting, but it's done in smaller areas of the state with a lower number of registered voters where the ballots are automatically mailed to those voters instead of an absentee ballot where the person has to make that request. Section 24, starting at the bottom of page 25, is the Voter's Bill of Rights, and this inserts a reference to identity, and the A2 amendment also inserted the right to cast a provisional ballot. Section 25 on page 27 is about showing up to vote on election day. When you are pre-registered, you must, before you can sign the roster or a signature certificate, the judge must require you to show your proof of ID and residence. And if you don't have that on you or you don't have proper ID, then you must be allowed to cast a provisional ballot. Section 26 on 28 is the process for provisional ballots. It talks about casting a provisional ballot. It's set up similar to an absentee ballot where you will cast your ballot and put it into a series of identifying and secrecy envelopes, and those envelopes are sort of set aside by themselves to be processed after election day. There's a process here for accepting or rejecting the ballots. Essentially, what needs to be done to prove your identity and residence is to appear in person 7 calendar days after the election to the county auditor or municipal clerk. And then you must do a series of things, including showing your proof of identity, making sure that the identity and residence match the information that was provided on election day, and making sure that there are no outstanding challenges. If the voter satisfies these requirements, then the provisional ballot is accepted and counted as part of the election results. If the person doesn't show up or is unable to satisfy these requirements, their ballot is rejected. There's a provision for reconciling the number of provisional ballots. If for some reason the number of provisional ballot signatures on the provisional ballot roster and the number of actual provisional ballots don't match, there's a process for rectifying that. It's the same process used for election day ballots that are cast. And then the next several sections, starting with section 27 and going through section 34, all adjust the canvassing timelines of the various governments. And this is because there's a 7-day window after the election, which has to be left open for people to come prove their identity and residence. So all of the canvassing timelines are moved back by a week. Section 35 on page 35 requires the courts to give out free copies of certified court orders, decrees, records, or other documents if it's necessary to obtain a voter ID card. Section 36 requires the Secretary of State to contract with a vendor to do a public education campaign about the requirements of the law. Section 37 requires the Secretary of State to report back to the legislature next year about legislative changes that are necessary to implement voter ID, and requires a look at the adopted rules and ways that they can be codified into statute. Moving to page 36, section 38 requires the Commissioner of Public Safety to provide training to the driver's license agents on how to issue the voter ID cards. Section 39 is a series of appropriations to the Secretary of State and to the Commissioner of Public Safety and to management and budget to pay for the act. And then there is a repealer of a section that is redundant to the new language of the bill. And except for, then there's the effective date. This is generally effective in 2023, with the exception of most of the the state, voter ID card provisions are effective much sooner. And as I mentioned, Article 2 is a series of conforming changes that I'm happy to answer questions about, but won't go through at this point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Stengel, for a good, thorough walkthrough of the things, and I appreciate Senator Newman, your thoughtfulness at writing the language of this bill, and especially the free supporting documents that would be needed for it as well. Appreciate your thoughtful approach. So members, we do have testifiers at this time. And Senator Fateh, if you do have a question, you want to go before the testifiers, or do you want to wait for after? Senator,
I just wanted to ask, is this the appropriate time? I wanted to request a roll call vote on this.
it's appropriate. Roll call being requested, a roll call granted. There will be a roll call. All right, members, with that, we will go ahead and members, as always, there are a list of testifiers, and it's going to be a short period of time enable us to get all of our. Senator Fateh, you have your hand up yet? Is that another question or just forgetting to lower it?
Also had a question and a comment for Senator Newman, but if we can wait till after the testifier.
We'll wait. Yes, we'll wait for after that. And so I've started the list, so we'll
Thank you, Madam
continue.
Chair. Thank you.
Pardon? Okay. And members, to let you know, all testifiers have been given instructions. They have 3 minutes to testify today, and to allow us time to do our other business and to also take care of other member questions and things that they would like to do. With that, the first testifier on our list at this time is Secretary of State Steve Simon. Secretary Simon, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'll try to fit my remarks within the allotted time. 11 months ago, I was before this committee on Senator Newman's quite similar voter ID bill. And at that time, I said that although Senator Newman and I respect one another, we had an honest, good faith difference of opinion on this bill. And that's still the case, but there's much, much more. It feels a lot different now than it did then. And that's because this country has seen a tidal wave of disinformation about our democracy, about voting, and about the last election. These are lies designed to manipulate and mislead people. So here is the truth. The truth is that the 2020 election was fundamentally fair, honest, accurate, and secure, period. State and federal courts around the country have examined and re-examined allegations to the contrary and found nothing, no material fraud or misconduct. So this bill, in my judgment, would not do anything to increase our already high level of confidence. What would do that is for all of us to tell the truth about the election and about the election system. So in Minnesota, despite a once-in-a-century pandemic, our voters leaned into the election. For the third time in a row, Minnesota was #1 in America for voter participation, and that's not an accident or a coincidence, at least in some part. That is a measurement of overall confidence in the system. People understand and know in their bones that it is fundamentally fair and fundamentally honest. Otherwise, they wouldn't participate in such high numbers. None of us would. It would be a waste of time. On December 8th, I testified before this committee, differently constituted, obviously. It was right in the middle of the drumbeat of lies designed to discredit the 2020 election. And I said I was concerned about the kind of language that was then being used to whip people into a state of outrage. And I said I thought someone would get killed. And I have never been more sorry to be right. We can have our differences on election policy, and we do, but we can't have differences on the fundamental objective truth. As for this particular bill, I think it's an example of the more you look, the less you like. Voter ID has surface appeal, certainly, but as voters discovered in 2020, the more you look and peel back the layers, the more you discover how dangerous it can be. And that's why I suspect they voted it down. The bill, if enacted, would shut out potentially hundreds of thousands of eligible voters. And let's start with seniors very quickly. I urge all members here to do what I did when I was in the legislature. Every time I was at a senior assisted living center or a a nursing home, I did an informal poll. I said, raise your hand if you have a current ID that reflects this current address where you now live. I never got past 50%. Therein lies a big problem. Provisional balloting, it would create a maybe list. Maybe we'll count them, maybe we won't for the first time in Minnesota history. And it's no wonder that across the country, some 85% of provisional ballots are never counted because people don't want to go to a county office a week after the election, particularly if all the results have been called. They're just not going to do it. So those people will be shut out. Madam Chair, I see my time is quickly at an end. I would just say that we have a system that is tested and trusted in Minnesota. Minnesotans know that our elections show integrity and accuracy. And one of the reasons we know that is people keep showing up in droves despite a once-in-a-century pandemic. So the more you look, the less you like. That's why Minnesota rejected the idea once, and that's why I respectfully urge members to reject that idea today. Thank you for your time and attention.
Madam Chair.
Secretary Simon.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Newman.
If I may respond, I understand Secretary Simon is going to have to leave, but I would like to have an opportunity to respond while he's still sitting here, if I may.
Senator Newman, go ahead, and I'll go
be very
after
brief.
you.
Secretary Simon is correct. We have known each other a very long time, and I do, in fact, have a great deal of respect for him. But in this particular case, we obviously very strongly disagree with one another. I want to bring to the committee's attention, not once did I bring up the 2020 election. I have not tried to inflame anybody in terms of whether there is truth or lies. And I will tell you candidly, I am not lying when I bring forward this bill. It is a genuine, legitimate issue that I think the people of this state have a right to talk about, and to cast the kinds of aspersions on this bill that Secretary Simon is doing by talking in terms of lies and disinformation really does not do him justice. And candidly, I am offended by that presentation to characterize this bill in light of the 2020 election, which we all know was a very, very difficult time in this country. And I am in no way excusing any of the conduct of people involved. I candidly am bewildered by the opposition, the visceral opposition to using a modern tool to try and protect the integrity of our elections. And I really disagree with Secretary of State Simon when he says hundreds of thousands of people are going to be disenfranchised. I do not believe that. And I'm not lying when I say that. I don't believe that they're going to be disenfranchised. I think they already have identification. And if they don't, they have the right to sign an affidavit saying they can't get it. And the Crawford case has legitimized all of those kinds of thoughts. The fact that we have a provisional balloting aspect in this bill is not there to disenfranchise people. It is to protect them so that they won't be disenfranchised. And if these hundreds of thousands of people decide that they're not going to take that extra step to go to the clerk's office and provide the necessary documents to legitimize their ballot, I think that they candidly have a personal responsibility to do that. And we seem to be myopic in only looking at those who may be disenfranchised by modern tools protecting the election process. And we forget about the fact that if there and when there are illegal votes cast in Minnesota, they are counted. And the folks who have cast legal votes are thereby disenfranchised. So Secretary Simon, I really disagree with the characterization and the presentation that you have made. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Newman, and I concur totally. When I hear words used in my committee of accusing other people of lies, dangers, and other things like that repetitively, it's a great disservice and a great disrespect to the citizens of Minnesota who have an absolute right to ask questions and to try and chill them or keep them from using that by these accusatory kinds of statements for a second time in this committee is not respectful and will not be accepted as the tone of this committee. With that, I will go to Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Simon, yes or no answer. Does election fraud take place in the state of Minnesota in every election? That is a yes or no question.
Secretary Simon.
Yes. Senator Osmek, it is more complicated than that.
Secretary Simon, the question though is quite specific.
I heard it. Madam Chair, you're not the question cop. The answer is in very, very small.
Secretary Simon, this is
a dozen or two.
The words that we are having right now, and calling me as chair of the committee a question cop, really? Secretary Simon, is that really what this is about? I will assume you are not going to answer, and we will go ahead.
You would allow me and others more than 3 minutes. Senator Newman had more than 3 minutes just rebutting.
These are members of the committee, Secretary Simon, and this is not the staff of your office. This is a committee, and please stop interrupting.
I've answered the question.
Secretary Simon, you have an opportunity to answer a question that was addressed to, and by the way, I have dealt with this in other committees as well, in other situations, testifiers thinking that because they are on a Zoom committee hearing, that gives them the right to just speak when they want to, interrupt when they want to, and make comments when they want to. That is not the case. This is still a committee hearing. We have a chair and we have members of the committee. And so Senator Osmek has the right to ask a question, and you have a responsibility to answer his question, Secretary Simon.
I just did so, Madam Chair.
All right. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So because I didn't get a yes or no answer, I will ask this question again. In every election in Minnesota, does voter fraud occur? That is a yes or no answer.
To a tiny
Please, Secretary Simon, observe committee process. I will call on you to answer the question. Secretary Simon.
Madam Chair and Senator Osmek, to a minuscule extent, the answer is yes.
Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that's great because it does happen. And I'm glad, Secretary Simon, you have said what happens in Minnesota. Every election cycle, there is voter fraud. November 1st, 2019, NPR story, 13 absentee ballots are cast in Minneapolis, which were against the law. In 2018, we have criminal conviction of a gentleman named Jeffrey Spanner. In 2017, we have absentee abuse of absentee ballots by someone called Marie Landsteiner. In 2016, Noah Summers, ineligible voting. These go on and on and on and on. To say it is minuscule, I will grant you, it is not something that happens in the millions or in the hundreds of thousands. But when former Senator Franken is elected by 100 or by 300 ballots, and we have in the presentation provided examples where a single vote or a small portion of votes can turn an election. What we're asking for here is something relatively simple. Secretary Simon, I appreciate the fact that you want to drag in the 2020 election and use it as a piñata. But what we're trying to do is help individuals in the state of Minnesota understand that we take election security seriously. I'm not going to impugn you or say you don't, but what I will say is to characterize this bill or characterize other members of this committee who may not be in your political party as not caring or impugning our reputation as trying to disenfranchise people is out of bounds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Osmek. And we do have other hands up, and I know, gentlemen, you wish to speak. And but I will at this time call on our other 5 testifiers, 5 testifiers, to be sure that we give them that amount of time. And then Senator Fateh and Senator Carlson and Senator Pratt, you will be called on next. All right. With that, I will go to Ms. Maia, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. Ms. Maia, will you go ahead with your presentation? Remember, you have 3 minutes.
Definitely. Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ileana Mejia, and I work at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. We are an association of over 2,200 nonprofit members from every part of the state and every nonprofit activity. The Minnesota Council of Nonprofit opposes a proposal to require photo identification to vote. We urge you to oppose Senate File 173 because this proposal would have serious impacts on the community served by many nonprofit organizations throughout the state. Among our 2,200 members, those serving the veterans, people with disabilities, the elderly, students, highly mobile populations, and others would find that those that they serve encountering new barriers to voting under this bill. And so while it's popularly assumed to be true, it's not the case that all Minnesotans have government issued photo identification, or that those who don't can attain one with ease if they are provided by the state at no cost. Testimony provided by many nonprofits and the people they serve has illustrated the myriad of ways that substantial difficulties in obtaining government issue photo identification still exist. Barriers include homelessness, transit dependency, cost of obtaining supporting documentation, mobility, and other issues. The nonprofit sector has been a long champion of civic participation, whether that's volunteering for a food shelf, serving on a board of directors, or running for office. We believe that a healthy society provides robust and equal opportunity for civic participation. And we know that our organizations and our state both count on it. Voting is the first and most consistent act of civic participation, and one which lays the foundation of a lifetime of community engagement. And we believe that Minnesota's nation-leading voter turnout supports our robust civic sector and should be celebrated and expanded rather than restricted. Thank you for the consideration of these concerns.
Thank you very much for your testimony. With that, we will go next to Jana Curran with the ACLU. Ms. Curran, will you please present your testimony?
Hello, Madam Chair and Senate members. My name is Jana Curran, and I'm the Community Engagement Director for the ACLU of Minnesota. Voting is the cornerstone of our democracy and the fundamental right upon which all of our civil liberties rest. Since its founding over 100 years ago, the ACLU has been working to protect and expand Americans' freedoms to vote through litigation and advocacy around the country and across our great state. In 2020 and 2019 alone, we filed 3 voting rights cases to protect and expand the electorate. 2 of 3 were successfully resolved, and the other is currently on appeal. We have tens of thousands of members from throughout the state, and we are here to testify against Senate File 173. Minnesota is justly proud of its high voter turnout. This year, we topped 80% turnout, once again being top in the nation and setting a new standard. A healthy democracy is one where more people participate. The basis of American democracy is that we pick our leaders. Our leaders do not pick their voters. Even in the midst of a pandemic that has affected more than 400,000 of our loved ones and created the greatest economic crisis for decades, we turned out in record numbers to vote. Minnesotans know the power and dignity in voting. It is unfortunate that instead of celebrating our turnout and engagement, we are back here discussing once again a bill that has the potential to deprive many voters of their right to vote, reduce participation, and exclude people from the democratic process. Senate File 172 is unnecessary and can be actively harmful to our democracy and to Minnesotans. The ACLU of Minnesota stands firmly opposed to voter ID laws. We fought against the constitutional amendment in 2012, and we are also opposing this one. The voter ID provision of this bill disproportionately harms low-income people, communities of color, especially Indigenous and Black communities, the elderly, people with disabilities, and students. People from those communities are less likely to have a currently valid ID, which take time and money to obtain. People may also often lack the proper documentations needed to obtain proper identification. Even making the voter ID free does not really make it free, because it's not just about the cost of the D itself. This Senate file also introduces the use of provisional ballots into Minnesota's elections process. It would end Minnesota's long-standing system of allowing all challenge voters to swear an oath that they are eligible, with the consequence of a felony conviction if they are not eligible. There are many reasons that the information regarding a voter could be inaccurate and not verifiable between voting and ballot counting. We are concerned that many Minnesotans will have their vote incorrectly voided. Finally, the bill creates more barriers to same-day voter registrations. The barrier creates would make it more challenging for many people to use same-day voter registration and have their ballot counted. Same-day voters registration is something that is incredibly popular with the Minnesota electorate. A voter ID law and provisional ballot system would undermine Minnesota's established process, which is a fair, efficient, accessible, and reliable. The ACLU of Minnesota respectfully urges you to oppose Senate File 173. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Curran. The next testifier will be Ms. Witt, League of Women Voters, Minnesota. Ms. Witt, please proceed. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Michelle Whitty, Executive Director, League of Women Voters of Minnesota. My testimony focuses on one central question: what problem are we trying to solve? You have said we should be asked to allow questions, and that's mine today. Because until we find evidence of an actual problem that somehow voters are currently disenfranchised by illegal voting, I see no basis to burden our election statutes with voter ID and provisional ballot laws. This is being put forward as a solution in search of a problem. Senator Newman, you said you were bewildered, and I am equally bewildered that we would want to add cost and layers of additional laws when there is no evidence presented that we have a serious problem of people voting without proper ID here in Minnesota. The failure to identify a problem, however, is not because we haven't looked for one. To the contrary, we have a mountain of evidence showing that our voter registration system and elections continue to be conducted with the greatest rigor and bipartisan oversight. Consider 4 points of evidence, which is simply what we're asking also from this bill is the evidence. At your request, number one, the Office of Legislative Auditor conducted a comprehensive review of our state voting registration system in 2018. The auditor found that county attorneys' reports over an almost 2-year period indicated only 69 instances of registration or voting by ineligible people, also noting they are finding those when they occur. Number two, our election results are reviewed and audited through a detailed set of checks and balances at the local and state level, use of county and state canvassing boards, a detailed post-election review process, which is openly described on the OSS website. No mass inaccuracies were found, and I've personally witnessed those checks and balances in a referendum election that was won by only 5 votes. I was a part of when an election is close, both sides or both parties recount our ballots by hand. There are already provisions in place to address close elections, and yes, there are a few here and there, and those are handled. Number 3, lawsuits alleging election irregularities have been repeatedly dismissed by the courts, including by Republican judges who find these suits lack evidence. Number 4, perhaps most notably on November 12th, the Federal Elections Infrastructure Government Coordinating Council and Executive Committees issued a statement concluding, quote, there is no evidence that any voting system deleted, lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. So we know they continue to quote that there are many unfounded claims and opportunities for misinformation about the process of our elections, but we can assure you with the utmost confidence in the security and integrity of our elections, and you should too, unquote. The only reason I've heard for supporting new voter ID laws is that people have lost faith in our elections. Our faith in our democracy indeed needs to be restored, but that problem will not be solved by adding burdensome and costly voter ID laws. Faith in our systems can only be restored by telling the truth. The definition of integrity is the quality of being honest, and that's how we can restore integrity and confidence in our election system. And the truth here is good news. Our election process worked, even in the face of a deadly pandemic.
Okay.
More people were able to vote than ever before, with bipartisan review and checks and balances in place. More Democrats voted, more Republicans voted, more Minnesotans voted, leading the nation again in voting.
Your time is up.
Thank you so much for voting against Senate File 173.
Thank you, Ms. Witt. The next testifier here is Mr. Beck. Mr. Beck, please proceed with your testimony. You have to unmute yourself, sir. Mr. Beck, you are not coming through. You are still muted. You could attempt to use the space bar, just press the space bar down and hold it down, and then try speaking. Can we unmute them? We're trying to unmute you from our side, but sometimes when you do that, you're flipping back and forth. So why don't we go ahead, Mr. Beck, and we have one more testifier. How about you work that out, and we'll come back to you, Mr. Beck. Mr. Halperin, you are testifying today. And so, Mr. Halperin, you'd go ahead. If you're ready, proceed with your testimony. Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Max Halperin, and I wholeheartedly support Senator Newman's goal of improving public confidence in election results. Senator Newman pointed to the 2008 Crawford opinion from Justice Stevens, which posited a connection between voter ID laws and voter confidence. Unfortunately, at that time, no data were available on that connection. And so what Justice Stevens did was to cite as support the 2005 report of the Baker-Carter Commission, which had drawn the same connection on an equally conclusory basis. In other words, in 2005, the commission relied on common sense. And in 2008, Justice Stevens relied on the commission's reliance on common sense. And in 2020, it seems Senator Newman is still relying on common sense. Unfortunately, between 2008 and 2020, the data have become available. In fact, the first publication of social science research on this was later in 2008 from Professors Ansel Bahari and Persili, then at MIT and Columbia, now Harvard and Stanford. And what they did was they analyzed survey research on the opinions that voters had as to whether votes were being properly counted in their states, and tried to figure out what factors underlay the state-to-state variation. And in particular, was voter ID law differences between the states related to that? And the answer they came up with was no, absolutely not. There is no relationship whatsoever between state voter ID laws and public confidence in the vote. Now that's a counterintuitive result. So you might think maybe that's a study that somebody should try to replicate. And indeed, in 2016, there was another publication. This time, Professor Stewart of MIT was the lead author. They used bigger, better surveys, more recent, and they came up with the exact same result. No relationship at all between state voter ID laws and public confidence in votes. The 2020 version of that survey has been conducted. The results aren't published yet, but I've seen the preliminary results. It looks pretty similar, as you might expect. Some of the states, had serious issues with voter confidence. States like Georgia, Wisconsin, both of which it turns out are states with strict photo ID laws. At the other extreme, there are some states with widespread confidence in their election results, states like Wyoming, Massachusetts. Those two are quite different from each other, but they both share with Minnesota the property that they don't require any documentary proof of identity to vote. So what I would urge you is to take this complete distraction of a bill and set it aside, and instead focus directly on our shared goal of improving confidence in elections. And to do that when your constituents have concerns, by providing them with clear, factual information about Minnesota elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halperin. And with that, we'll go
Madam
to our
Chair.
final testifier.
Madam Chair, could I just interrupt for one moment? I apologize. I didn't hear Mr. Halperin introduce himself, and I'm just wondering if he was speaking as an individual or representing an organization. Thank you.
That's appropriate, Senator Clausen. Mr. Halperin, please just give a brief, what are you representing?
Madam Chair, committee members, I am speaking as an individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halpern. Thank you, Senator Clausen. With that, Mr. Beck, it looks like you are ready. And so proceed, Mr. Beck, and present your testimony. And also, Mr. Beck, since the others have done so and Senator Clausen asked the question, what group you are representing? Mr. Beck.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your assistance. Members, my name is George Beck. I chair Clean Elections Minnesota. We care about elections and campaign finance. It's well established among election officials that there is no significant voter fraud in Minnesota, as the Secretary of State indicated. Therefore, there's no justification for requiring voter ID, which will be expensive for taxpayers. Voter ID was defeated by the constitutional amendment, and it's my opinion that legislators that support this bill are not representing their constituents, but rather their political party. The provisional balloting option would require the voter to appear personally before the county auditor within 7 days of casting the ballot. Well, if you weren't discouraged by a provisional ballot initially, this would be sufficient to keep you from taking time off for work and going to the county auditor. And it's an unnecessary hurdle, sure to limit voting. The original purpose of provisional balloting in federal law was to enable challenged voters to vote. It was an effort to expand the number of voters, and that's not what is being used here. We were exempted from that requirement because of same-day registration. Congress said that where you have same-day registration, provisional balloting was unnecessary. This bill hampers the nationally praised and copied same-day registration provisions of our law by requiring election day registrants to use a provisional ballot. The changes in this bill would be at the expense of disenfranchising eligible voters and disproportionately affecting communities of color. It is voter suppression, pure and simple, contrary to the goal of the federal legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beck, for your testimony. Appreciate that. Members, we've concluded the list of testifiers that we have on our agenda today. I do have 4 members that I will call on, and that list is complete now. We will not have time to add to that, and members, you will each have about 2 minutes to ask a question or to make a comment. So Senator Fatah, as I said before, you are first and you may proceed. Senator Fatah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is for Senator Newman. Thank you. Senator Newman, you have said that you're concerned with close elections being affected by fraud. We know that voter ID laws disproportionately suppress the vote of working people, poor people, as well as Black and brown people. This bill is similar to the North Carolina bill that was struck down by the conservative John Roberts U.S. Supreme Court for, and I quote, targeting African Americans with almost surgical precision, end quote. Is it not the case that your legislation would benefit the Republican Party because the constituencies voter ID laws have been proven to suppress are less likely to support your party?
Thank you, Senator Fatah. Senator Newman.
Madam Chair, Senator, to respond to both you and Mr. Beck, I've not brought this bill forward because I am a Republican. I brought this bill forward because I am a state senator. And contrary to Mr. Beck's allegations that I'm not representing my constituents, it's quite to the contrary. The constituency that I come from does in fact support the passage of a voter ID bill, and I hear from my constituents on a very regular basis. To be sure, there are folks within my Senate district that don't support voter ID, but I will tell you that in my opinion, the overwhelming majority of them do. And in that case, I am in fact representing my constituents. I am not representing the Republican Party. I am doing my job as a state senator. I disagree with you, Senator, that this bill will disproportionately disenfranchise anybody. The language that I have outlined from the Crawford case very clearly points out that fact, that yes, there is a burden that is placed on some folks if they do not already have a photo ID that will allow them to vote. But having said that, the Supreme Court has found that that burden is not enough. It's not enough of a burden if we follow the precepts of Crawford to cause that disenfranchisement. So, Senator, I do in fact disagree with you, and I disagree with the characterization that this is solely a Republican idea, a Republican Party idea. I do not agree with that. I think there are folks out there that are independents and Democrats and from other political parties that do in fact support utilizing and modernizing our election process.
Thank you, Senator Newman. And Senator Newman, to also respond to this, I was at a conference and a former African-American mayor stated on the record at this conference on a panel that it was indeed a disenfranchisement to not require. And the main reason, he said, was because the efforts of the ID legislation predominantly benefit those who are at lower income, who may not have some of the socioeconomic benefits, because a large amount of money and effort here was to give them without charge the documents that they need in life for many, many other needs. And through this process, they are given access, and the large portion of the resources and finance go to benefit them. So I think your statements, Senator Newman, are well taken. With that, we'll go to the next person on my list, and that is Senator Carlson. Senator Carlson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And, there's a lot of questions here that I would like to give, but, we are approaching the end of the time you've given us here. But one thing that I want to start out with is a statement that, that is in the air above us all, and that is that we are not, as a committee, as senators, and as people responsible for elections, supporting the idea that Minnesota elections and national elections are, if we can say that they're free and they're honest and they're accurate and they are and they're secure, that's what will give confidence to the voters. Continuing to avoid saying those words and continuing to promote non-confidence in our elections is a disservice to our constituents. And one of the things I specifically want to mention is the statement by Senator Osmek when he talked about the 312 votes that somehow appear to be a problem in the Franken election. Senator Coleman's lawyer said to the Supreme Court, and you can get that on video, Senator Joe Friedman said, no, there is no fraud in this election. Now we have to decide whether Senator Coleman and his lawyer, Joe Friedman, were lying to the Supreme Court, or were they telling the truth? And if they were telling the truth, then we need to go on. This bringing up the 312 votes is really nonsense. And, we have a 1 vote margin.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Point of order, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just a moment, Senator Osmek, just a moment. Senator Carlson, it seems to be the intention to make statements like this and naming other members. Would you please simply ask your question?
Okay. Well, I guess
Senator Osmek, I will give you an opportunity to respond.
Okay. Well, this is a fact that Joe Friedman did say that. And by the way, you know, we're getting kind of off board here. You know, Madam
Yes.
Chair, you gave testimony from a mayor that you did not name. And is that mayor a person that is going to provide their testimony to this committee and put it on the record? Or are you going to just refer to that testimony by reference to a convention you were at?
Senator Carlson, if you're asking me the question, I will answer to you.
Okay.
The African-American mayor was not at a convention. It seems as though they keep being dragged into this sort of party stuff. It was as I was Secretary of State, and it was at a panel, and it was at a nonpartisan Secretary of State Association. My mind just blanked for a moment on the name, and I don't want to say a name that I can't remember off the hand right now, but that is who I was referring to. It was not at a political party convention. It was at an official entity. And with that, Senator Carlson, I'm going to give Senator Osmek here an opportunity, since you're not asking a question. If you'd like to ask it yet, please do. Otherwise, I'll go to Senator Osmek.
Okay, I'd like to ask the question. Can we as a committee say we have free, fair, honest, accurate, and secure elections in Minnesota?
Well, Senator Carlson, you as a member of this committee are certainly free to do so, and you already have. We don't vote on statements, we vote on bills, but you are free to make that statement. And by the way, Senator Carlson, this committee that I have served over the past years has had many questions, many bills. We brought up many kinds of issues to all of a sudden shut that down and say, okay, now nobody can say anything, that only certain words are allowed. And that is not the case for this committee. With that, I'll go to Senator Osmek, and I'll give you about 30 seconds, Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. Senator Carlson, you have a long history of misinterpreting or outright telling falsehoods about words that come out of my mouth. Highway 12 comes to mind. I was not speaking to fraud in the system with the 312 votes of the election of Senator Franken. I simply said there is a closeness to the election, and it's very important for us to have integrity in the system. And I believe that voter ID will improve the integrity as well as the observations from people outside as far of the integrity. So
thank you, Senator Osmek. I appreciate that. The point you were making was that there are close elections, and you gave an example of one, not anything more than that. With that, I'll go to the next one.
Senator
Carlson, you'll be able to have a further conversation with Senator Osmek as the two of you can, but we're going to go
he said I lied.
Members at this time, Senator Carlson. And so Senator Pratt, you are next on my list, and after that is Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just kind of a brief statement about my background. I've got nearly 10 years of experience working in fraud and identity theft, identification and prevention. And what we've found is that it's more difficult to identify fraud once it's occurred. But I guess my question, I really want to focus on the integrity piece of the election that Senator Newman brought up, and not continue this argument over whether fraud occurred or didn't. So I think Ms. Witt in her written testimony referenced the 2016 GAO report, which looked at 2 states and their voter turnouts between 2008 and 2012. So I guess I'm going to ask 2 quick questions of many of our testifiers. Mr. Beck said there was no significant fraud. I know Secretary Simon said no widespread fraud. I'd like to know and today he said minuscule. I'd like to know the definitions of what they mean by that. And then I'd like to address voter turnout, because as I looked at Wisconsin, 2008 voter turnout was 69%. In this last election, nearly 76%, an increase of 6.6%. 36 states have voter ID laws. New Hampshire's turnout increased 5.5%. Florida increased 2%. Georgia increased 8%. Isn't voter turnout not being suppressed by voter ID, but being enhanced by get out the vote efforts? And then I'll listen to the answers, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. We're not going to have time for those answers to be on this committee hearing. because they're already over our time. But members, you are free to contact Senator Pratt and give your answers directly to him. With that, we'll move on to Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the 36 states that have a voter ID, it's been found that it really only prevents in-person voter fraud, in impersonation of someone who they are not. And it's interesting that Justice Kennedy, in his opinion on the Indiana suit, also said that in-person voter fraud is rare. I think one of the things we have in close elections is that we do have the recount process. It's a protection against any type of voter irregularities, I believe. But I do have a question for Senator Newman. Would mail-in ballots be considered provisional ballots? Would mail-in ballots be considered provisional ballots since those persons are not present at the polling site?
Thank you, Senator Clausen. Senator Newman, briefly.
Very briefly, nice question, Senator Clausen. The answer is no, they would not, because they are pre-registered and within the mail-in voting process outlined in the bill, the witnesses would eliminate that ballot from going into a provisional ballot box.
Thank you, Senator Newman.
Yeah, assuming that the witnesses as required for the mail-in ballot are satisfied.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Thank you, Senator Clausen, for your question. With that, we'll go to closing of his presentation. Senator Newman, do you want to take a minute or two to just close?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I know that we're under the gun, and so I'm going to be extremely brief. I would bring to the committee's attention that once again, the discussion concentrated almost exclusively on voter fraud, which is only part of the issue that we are trying to discuss. Mr. Halpern brought up, I think fortunately, a question regarding voter confidence. He didn't agree with me, but it's at least an acknowledgement that there is more to this question than voter fraud. The only other thing I would say is this to my fellow senators. I believe that this is, like many, many issues that come before us, a legitimate question. And we have the right to bring bills forward and have discussions amongst us. And those discussions should be civil and courteous and not rise to the level of the kind of emotions that I've heard here today. So I would just urge, as we go forward, this bill is going to be heard, I believe, in other committees, and I think it's going to hit the floor. And I would simply urge that let's have what I consider to be an important civil discussion on a really, really important issue. With that, Madam Chair, if I could have this bill moved to the Transportation Committee, I think that's the next stop.
Yes, it is, Senator Newman. We'll do that shortly. Members, every time that we have this kind of discussion, I hear again, and as Senator Newman has referenced, and also Senator Pratt, the recognition that the court also stood for that it is valid to prevent, to deter, and to detect. Catching is extremely difficult. As a matter of fact, in Minnesota's laws, you almost have to be a criminal who says, yes, I intended to commit fraud, which is not the case in any other sort of situation. So to prevent, deter, and detect, as we all lock our doors, lock our cars, we take measurements against fraud in our bank accounts and our investments. We do all kinds of things to prevent, deter, detect, and correct. But the ballot is separated from the voter. And once that happens, there's a whole different situation than a credit card statement or even a bank statement. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind. With that, members, we'll proceed to a vote and a roll call being requested, a roll call granted. And the clerk will call the roll. And
Madam Chair, I think we have to move the bill first.
I'm going to Senator Newman, I'm going to do that. I was looking for the clerk
Okay.
on my screen, which was
I'm
my
sorry.
hesitation. I'm so sorry. Thank you for the help. Another chair is always helpful keeping that out. And so I move Senate File 173 as amended to be recommended to pass and to be referred to the Transportation, Finance, and Policy Committee. With that, members will proceed to roll call vote. And Mr. Neubauer, the clerk for this committee at the time, will proceed to the vote. Mr. Neubauer.
Senator Kiffmeyer,
Aye.
Senator Howe,
Aye.
Senator Carlson,
No.
Senator Osmic,
Aye.
Senator Pratt,
Aye.
Senator Karan,
Aye.
Senator Clausen,
No.
Senator Fateh,
No.
There being 5 ayes and 3 nays, the bill is passed and adopted. Thank you. And with that, members, our committee is adjourned for today. We'll have another agenda tomorrow and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you. We are adjourned.